Continuing where we left off, picking up with the black cards. We've been through white, we've been through blue. Time is to live the black cards now. Again, they're in a random order, so we'll go through in the order they come up. Maybe chat about them a little bit. Ooh, I gotta open up new sleeves. One sec. I'm sleeving these in, they already are in KMC Perfect Hard Inners. I really like the Perfect Hard Inner sleeve for double sleeving. I like a thick, chunky card that feels real stiff, real heavy. And the outers I'm using now, I'm trying these Hyper Phoenixes, which is like slightly thicker than normal sleeve that is made by KMC. That says, quote, our most durable sleeve ever. So hopefully I get a lot of play out of them in my cube. And also, like I said, I like a thick card, so if it's a little thicker, I'm not complaining. It'd be very cool to have a big enough 3D printer to make a whole cube box. All right, first up, this is honestly maybe one of my favorite black cards in the whole cube, and that is Collective Brutality. This card, boy, does it spark joy. It's, hey, Talo. It's just a discard outlet, a modal spell. It's like got something for every matchup. If you're up against the control deck, you can just peek at their hand, take something from it. If it gets aggro, you can do the last two modes because you're not going to get to cast your big spell. So you remove something and you have a little 4-point life swing to stabilize a little bit. Does a little bit of everything. Sometimes you get to do all three. I don't even have a Reanimator deck in my cube, and I still love Collective Brutality. I think it's so fun. What a great card. Next up is Toxic Deluge. I gotta be honest, I thought I would like this Richard Kane Ferguson art more, and the detail on it is great. I mean, Richard Kane Ferguson's detail in his work is always incredible, but the way this looks in like a pack and in your hand, it's just kind of like mush. It's kind of mushy. So I'll probably replace this at some point with a different printing of Toxic Deluge because it's funny. It's like the perfect example of how context matters so much. Like in isolation, I think the piece of art is really beautiful, and then in context, it's like, oh, it's kind of smudgy, you know. Anyway, I love Toxic Deluge. It's got life payment, roof stuff. You get to like attack in, put some damage on blockers, and then like get them with a very specifically sized Toxic Deluge. So fun. Not much to say about Infernal Grasp, other than it is the Doomblade I have always wanted that we finally got, which is to say a Doomblade that has no ridiculous limitation. The life loss I love. That's great. Yeah, a lot of RKF stuff does not really scale down to small sizes that well. I agree. I think his art on the very early days of Magic worked really nicely, actually. Like, all of his stuff in Legends and stuff looks really good, but yeah, I agree. It's not always the best for a whole card. Disfigure is a removal spell that I think more people should put in their cube. I was averse to this for a long time, if only because I was like, it's so much worse than Shock. How can I put this card in my cube that is basically like Shock, but just worse? And it's true. It is worse than Shock. It doesn't hit Planeswalkers. It doesn't hit their face. It's just basically Shock for creatures. But it is much better at removing creatures. It can be a combat trick where in combat you can turn something that would be a trade or even them eating your creature into you eating their creature, which is nice. And I found that the -X, in this case 2, is really good for getting around Indestructible and like other weird stuff that you don't foresee. I'm really high on Disfigure now, and very happy to have it in any black deck. I think Lash of Malice is cool. Lash of Malice is for those that don't know, the one that is same mana cost, also an instant, and it gives target creature +2/-2 until end of turn. So very often it'll perform the same purpose of just killing something that's at X2 or lower or smaller. But sometimes you get to attack with your like X3 and they don't block it, and then you're like, haha, get you for 2 more damage. I think it's cool. It's not the kind of thing I like to do in the Bun Magic Cube specifically. I feel like it's a little like tricky and cute to put together in this cube normally. So I like the cleanness of Disfigure, where like you kind of know what the card is meant to do. But I think Anthony plays Lash of Malice on the regular cube, and I like it a lot there. Moving on to the Last Hope. This is a messed up Planeswalker, folks. It's the kind of Planeswalker that aggro very often just can't beat. What are you going to do when your opponent plays Leon of the Last Hope and can uptick to kill some of your threats? That's unfair. That should be a downtick or something. But it's really awesome. And it's, I think, one of the easier Planeswalkers to ultimate. And boy, having emblems is fun. I have lost with Liliana of the Last Hope emblem in play before, though, so that's the thing. Dreadfugue, the old Cleave, Thoughtseize. That one doesn't spark any joy. It's fine. It does what it's supposed to do, but I don't have fun casting it or fun drafting it. I'm like, okay, sure, you do the thing you're supposed to do. By comparison, a card that does spark a lot of joy well beyond its power level and impact in the environment, is Unearth. Whew, boy, do I love Unearth. Love to Unearth a Snapcaster Mage and then flash something else back. Because you can Snapcaster Mage then Unearth then later. It goes so good with so many cheap creatures. It's great in like the Pyromancer style decks. Unearth is bae, as they say. Sus Opening asks, what are your thoughts on instant versus sorcery speed removal in your cube? For what I understand, instant removal causes combat tricks similar to Disfigure to be less desirable. What is your strategy to balance that dynamic? So I actually don't mind removal as quote-unquote combat tricks, right? Like you double block something and then I remove one of your blockers and now the combat is really bad for you. I don't mind that as much because the thing I find a little bit tilting about regular combat tricks is that you get like extra punished because your opponent had a card that was otherwise uncastable or otherwise actively bad, and then you happened to block some way that was likely, optimal. You did what you were supposed to do, but in doing what you were supposed to do, you get punished for it by getting blown out by a combat trick. And the difference there between that and a regular removal spell is that the removal spell is good pretty much all the time, right? If they can make it a little better by getting you to double block, then sure. But there's a certain density of removal in my environment that players should expect, such that I find when my players are going to blocks, they will think, well, if I do this, I'm going to get blown up by a removal spell. And they make that decision consciously. Whereas I think a lot of combat tricks, they're not at the density where you can actually really play around them. And you're just like, well, if you have it, you have it, I guess, because I can't afford to actually play around this for any amount of time. So because removal is ubiquitous enough and present enough in my environment, I don't find it to be as much of a trick or as much of a kind of a weird trap when people play it. So when it comes to instants versus sorceries, I like to have a mixture of both. Obviously, sorceries tend to be more competitively costed because they have a timing restriction on them. And the thing I'm always conscious of is that I think instant speed removal is really desirable in a reactive deck, right? Like if you're playing counter spells or just cards in general that you don't want to play or want to sequence based on what your opponent is doing, then instant speed removal is hugely valuable there because it's way more flexible in terms of when you can cast it, and it enables that game plan. Removal that is just as good in a proactive deck, or sometimes even better in a proactive deck than a reactive deck. Stuff like Fateful Absence, Soul Partition, Unexpectedly Absent. These are all cards that I think are better if you are attacking your opponent, because you're basically getting a tempo advantage, and if you can take advantage of that tempo advantage by having creatures on board or having planeswalkers that are ticking up, whatever your sort of game plan you're progressing in. If you're proactive, then I think sorcery speed is totally fine. And oftentimes, I've seen players cast an instant speed when they totally should have casted at sorcery speed, right? Like, the level 1 of, learning to play Magic is, you have an instant. Wait till the last possible minute to cast it because you have more information, and that's just good. And then players get this heuristic ingrained in their head of, I'll wait till the last possible minute to cast it. And then they don't cast it against their tapped out opponent that they actually really can't afford to take a hit from a certain threat from next turn anyway. And they wait till they let them untap, and then they get gotten by some counterspell or sacrifice outlet or something. So I actually like having some sorcery speed removal in there because it kind of forces that play pattern. It forces you, obviously, to use it proactively or to decide ahead of time what you're going to remove, or to make the decision if you are reactive of when you can safely tap out of some mana at instant speed, or rather, tap out of some mana at sorcery speed to get rid of something and giving up having that mana available later on instant speed. So anyway, in summary, instant speed removal, especially important on spells that I'm going to put in control decks, and the control deck removal spells are the ones that at least 1-for-1 your opponent. They're not tempo-oriented. They are, 1-for-1s at least, if not better. And the ones that are more tempo-oriented, I am more okay with them being sorceries, and I expect them to go more in proactive decks where people are okay to use them there. Like, I really love Flame Slash. I think Flame Slash is a great card. I think a lot of people look at it and go like, bummer, it's not as cool as Lightning Bolt. And sure, I don't know, maybe it's not as cool. But I really like that card and its play patterns. Blunt-Lord ACAB. I do really like the new Unearthed cards as well. I think they actually are playable in higher power levels, to be honest. Though the white one that I don't remember the names off the top of my head, but the white one that brings a creature back and puts a +1/+1 counter on it, or brings an artifact back, I think is really good. And the 5-mana one that can be cast for 2 mana on a smaller creature, I also think is really good. I don't know, like there was definitely a couple years ago in the Cube discourse, people were talking about how viable like Zombify was in a powered environment, or an environment where people were playing like a powered Reanimator deck. And I come down on the side of like, actually Zombify is fine, right? Like the most important thing in my Reanimator deck is to have enough density of all the different things I want. Enough threats, enough ways to get them in my graveyard, and enough ways to reanimate them. And yeah, sure, do I want Reanimate because it's like the best one probably, or Animate Dead or Exhume or whatever? Of course I want those. They're like more efficient. But I'll also take a Necromancy or a Zombify or a Resurrection or whatever the sort of card of the day is. And so I think in that sense that that 5-mana one, the black one that is 5-mana Zombify, or like a 2-mana Unearth, I think is what it is, roughly. I think that's really good. I think, when you can I think, actually, here's the thing I don't like about both of them. I'm pretty sure both of them only say your own graveyard. I'm sure the white one does, and the black one probably does too. That's a change in reanimation effects that I don't love. I think it's so cool when you can steal your opponent's stuff. But I actually think those cards would be fine at a high power level, and I would consider playing them. I'd be all over that white Unearth effect in Improvised War if I had any real artifacts in my cube, but I just don't anymore. Michael Jickles. Michael J.I. Kells. Michael asks, do you try to restrict certain kinds of removal to certain colors? I generally just try and follow the color pie. I think the color pie is a good thing. So I don't have Mana Tithe in the cube. I don't have Psionic Blast in the cube. But, within the color pie, there's a lot of affordances for the kinds of removal different colors can get. So, yeah, fair reanimate is great. It's fun to reanimate the fair stuff, like for value. Oh, boy. I love this card. Scourge of the Skyclaves. The last year of my cube, right now we're working on getting some responses to the year in review cube article we publish at the end of every year, and I'm starting to think about how I'm going to answer the questions myself. And I think my year was really marked by falling in love with Tarmogoyfs. 2-mana threats that can actually become dominant and win the game, even if they require some hoops. Actually, especially if they require some hoops. I like my my threats to require me to jump through some hoops, and Scourge of the Skyclaves is definitely like that. But, man, this thing is so often huge and then just gets bigger as the game goes on. Never kicked it, though. Maybe someday. Yeah, Mana Tithe, I think, is a bit more of a feel-bad than Force Spike, because there are other 1-mana counterspells in blue. There's also, in my cube, 3 0-mana counterspells in blue. So it's like you have to play with the expectation that that's always an option. Murderous Rider. Surprisingly, I think one of my least favorite adventure cards. It's just, I don't know. Just like the Kill-A-Thing adventure is kind of like, Like, I so much prefer Brazen Borrower. I think it's so much cooler to bounce something and then have this, weird attacker. All right, this is maybe a candidate for my favorite Magic card of all time. We're going to stop and talk about it briefly. Dark Confidant. One of the first invitational cards back when Magic would have a invitational every year, and the winner of that invitational would be invited to design a card for Magic and then get their likeness put on the card. I'm really glad to see this kind of thing coming back with Elite Spellbinder and Paulo Vitor Dominarosa, and I hope they keep doing it. I think it's very cool. And this was the card that Bob Maher designed. If people haven't seen the Pro Tour Finals from 1998 in Chicago, where Bob Maher plays Brian something. Anyway, Bob's on a like Bant Oath of Druids control deck, and his opponent's playing like full-on Necropotence combo. And it's the best finals of any Pro Tour ever in my experience, and also just such a really cool... It's a really cool era of Magic captured on film. Anyway, I love that video, and I don't know much more about Bob Maher other than that video specifically. But if this isn't a perfect card, I don't know what is, right? The old border, the perfect flavor text, greatness at any cost. Yeah, the guy that designed it, his name is Bob. I don't know if you're just trolling me for saying obvious things, but that is why people call Dark Confidant Bob. And yeah, the kind of card that has a really high ceiling, but also does cost you something. It affects your deck building, affects your sequencing, and can kill you. I don't mind dying to my own Dark Confidant. I think it's fine. I have definitely flipped Treasure Cruise with Dark Confidant before, and I say, fine, whatever. I like that. I wanted that to happen. That was the plan. Anyway, I adore that Dark Confidant. Fatal Push. How do we feel about this, like, very Kaladeshi art of Fatal Push? With, like, the glass shattering and the Aetherborn guy. It's fine. It's kind of funny to me. I like thinking of just, like, shoving a guy and then he dies. Very funny. Exactly, Shindir. You flip Treasure Cruise with Bob and it's like, great, I just got 4 Bob triggers. I get to draw so many cards now. Yeah, no, it's because of Bob Maher. I don't know of any other... Like, some people will oftentimes... I don't think any other invitational cards are known by the name of their creator so commonly. But Bob is shorter than Dark Confidant, I guess. I feel like people don't play Murderous Cut anymore. Is that just me? Do I just feel that way? I love Delve cards. I love Murderous Cut. Doesn't have any weird restrictions. Just destroys the thing. And yes, I put it at the 1 mana slot on my curve. That's where I intend to cast it. I think this is art-wise my favorite version, or my favorite Otawara Legendary Land. This version of Takenuma Abandoned Mire. I love purple, and in different lights, you see this as like more blue or black or purple, depending on how the light hits it. It's really nice. Really nice. Delve has anti-synergy with what black normally does. Yeah, that's true to a degree. I see that. I see that magic. Night's Whisper. My favorite, most boring card. 2 mana draw 2, baby. The original 2 mana draw 2. Get out of here, expressive iteration. Think you're so cool. We got life loss. That's even cooler. Order of Midnight is an adventure card I'm still on. My play group has been pleasantly surprised by this card. I think they were like, oh, this card? This isn't like a powerful cube card. But I think it definitely plays at higher power levels. It was better when I had a more focused, proactive black deck, like an aggro black deck. But I think it's still totally fine. You play it in your 2-color aggro deck with some black in it. I'd be excited for them to print a like mythic, rare, power level and complexity Night's Whisper. I guess that's kind of what they don't really put card draw at mythic rare ever, right? At least not normal card draw. I do appreciate when the adventure cards are the same mana cost on both sides, so I know exactly where to put it in my curve. There's no question. I'm so glad we got new art for Liliana of the Veil, and it's so good. I did not like the old art, and this new art is so excellent. I immediately replaced her. I haven't looked in detail at your Fey Cube list, Magic. What do the non-Fey colors do? I guess, are there any non-Fey colors? Red is the most non-Fey color. Is there any red fairy ever printed? I can think of, for sure, blue is the main color. Black seems like a secondary color. Green actually gets a decent amount of fairies, at least it did back in the day. White fairies. Do white and red have any fairies? Sus opening. Did the Graveyard Cube at CubeCon have any influence, inspiration for you and the cube? I did not get to play that cube nor look at it that closely. So no, I have not been influenced by it, but it seems like a cool cube from what I heard. Would play it. I see. It's all fairy tales. So you get the other stuff. Not just fairies. I assume you play, what's my favorite fairy? The green one that lets you return a forest to your hand to untap a creature. Scrib Sprite? Is that what it is? All right, Sprite Dragon is a red fairy, but it's also blue. You know, it's both. I was so excited when I came around on the, Scrib Rangers, that's the one. Scrib Sprite is the old school, beta one or whatever. Man, Gurmag Angler would probably just be better in my cube than Tossiger, but this is a situation where I don't mind the complexity because the ability is so cool, and just, the vibe of the card, this, hot dude eating some bananas in the shadows. So much cooler than a big fish. Love it. I guess Red's whole ethos is pretty antithetical to what fairies are, huh? Are there a lot of, really impulsive, passionate, aggressive fairies? I feel like they're often kind of, helpful creatures. And yes, I put Tossiger in the 1-mana slot of my curve. That's normal. I'm normal. Yeah, that's true. There's chaotic and mischievous fairies. That's true. Yeah, give us more red fairies. I'm immediately converted. I want, the mischievous, trickster-style fairies in red. I agree with you completely all of a sudden. Does anyone know the one piece of editorializing I do when I introduce this cube to new players that have never played it before? I generally don't tell people what to draft, right? I'm just yeah, do whatever you want. It's a cube. There's a lot of fixing. There's not combos. The one thing I editorialize, does anyone want to guess? The one card I tell people about? I'm sure I've mentioned it on the show before. You might know. That's right, it's Reanimate. I tell people, hey, there's Reanimate in the cube. Don't first pick it and say, I'm going to play Reanimator, because there is no Reanimator deck. I mean, technically, you could figure out some way to discard a Primeval Titan and then reanimate it. That'd be the most reanimatable threat, I think, in my entire cube. That would be, unfair. But hasn't come up. That is the one thing I tell people about. Don't get tricked by the Reanimate. Deadweight, the disfigure that Luris loves. It's really important to have a couple cards in your cube to make Luris good, because by default it's not that good, so you really want some cards to really abuse Luris's ability to make it playable. Lol. Hope everyone realizes that's sarcasm. I really love having the matching complementary arts for Damnation and Wrath of God in the cube, so they actually are a bonded pair. I use the new companion rule, Sus opening, and I think without it, Luris would be cut from the cube for being too oppressive. Even with the actual companion, the modern companion rules text, where you have to pay 3 to put it into your hand at sorcery speed, I still think it's on the cusp of being too good in my cube. And the reason it sticks around is because I do really love the draft limitation. I love that it forces people to play cards they otherwise maybe wouldn't play, and makes them make concessions. Like, I guess I'm gonna give up my Living Out of the Last Hope and my whatever to play my Lurrus. Yeah, it's not hard to meet Lurrus's draft restriction in my cube. Like, even if you get a pack 3, it's like, okay, I'll give up 3 cards, and then I'll be fine. So, you get to do it. Thank you for the follow, Violetto. Welcome to the stream. We're resleeving my cube, because the sleeves are dirty. It's been too long. I think it's been since pre-pandemic that I resleeve the cube. Yeah, definitely. For sure. And, that's gross. Also, at some point, the sleeves get dirty enough that you don't even bother telling people to wash their hands before the draft because you're like, well, they're already dirty. But then it just gets dirtier at like an exponential pace. We are on the black section. We're going in color order. I'm not going to get it all done tonight. I don't think I have the stamina in me. But we've done white and blue. We're approaching the end of black. But that's only like 150-ish cards out of 360. I don't think I'm probably not going to stream the resleeving of the basic lands. I don't think that needs to happen. But yeah, so we're 150 out of 300 of the way through. Do people mispronounce Violetto? How else would you pronounce that? What is your favorite card in your cube for drafting? Like the card I'm most excited to like pack one, pick one? Or I don't know. I want to know what chat thinks of Lethal Scheme. It's funny, I feel like my play group, which is largely people that are like not plugged into the like cube design discourse or whatever. Every time I introduce a card that they hadn't heard of before, usually from a commander product, right, to cube, like a Pest Infestation or a Lethal Scheme or something, either they are going to be super excited about it and like jump on it immediately, or they're going to be like, why is this in the cube? What is this? I don't like this card. And Lethal Scheme was one that people adopted really quickly. They were like, ooh, this card is cool. I want to play it. And it's been pretty fun, I think. I like that it's a removal spell that encourages you to play to the board. It's like nice to have some removal that matters sometimes. Hi, Dreams and Memes. My basic lands are all various old border foil basics. So, like, I just have... I did make sure to get one of each of the old border printings. So, like, I have one foil of every old border basic land, and then I have, like, duplicates of a lot of others. For a long time, I just, like... I would see any of these anywhere for like $1 or $2, and I would just buy them until I had enough for the whole cube. And then I ended up with a lot of extras, so I have like too many of these lands floating around. Speaking of Bitter Blossom, this is the rare card that if they printed Bitter Blossom in an old border foil, I wouldn't want it, because the way that this art kind of meshes with the actual card frame is really good. I do have some lands I could put in another cube, but my next cube is all going to be unsleeved, so no foils there. Do you put Bitter Blossom with the creatures or with the non-creatures? Again, I like to kind of put it like on curve and off curve, like proactive and reactive, so up with the creatures it goes. Look at all those delicious 1-mana spells. Love to see it. Violetto? That's not okay. Yeah, I've been working on this this Neoclassical Cube, Talo, which I haven't talked about at length yet, just because it's still a work in progress, and I'm not quite sure where things are going to land on it yet, but I can pull it out real quick. Ta-da! Neoclassical. And the idea is that it's basically meant to be a cube that captures the gameplay patterns of old school Magic, but doesn't adhere to just old Magic cards. So it can play modern cards as long as they have old school play patterns. And in the fashion of everybody that's been doing this since Ristic Studies, this cool video, I'm going to play it unsleeved. So I have been asking people in my playgroup and people on Twitter and stuff to try and hook me up with like beat up versions of cards so I don't ruin nice versions of cards by playing them unsleeved. And like, for example, at Work Life Value, Dan Schneider, the owner of the Devoid Cube, I just got this Hypnotic Spectre from him in the mail that, you know, some 12-year-old at some point like sharpied the borders out of, which is just so good. Now I'm gonna use the using modern rules. I don't want to mess around with old rules and then have to like make rulings on it and stuff. So there's no damage on the stack, no mana burn, none of that stuff. But just gonna be pursuing the best parts of old school Magic. It was definitely heavily influenced by the old border foil cube I played at CubeCon, which I liked way more than I thought I was going to. I kind of thought it would be like, all right, well, this will be like a fun lark, a little bit of nostalgia or whatever, but I'm sure the gameplay patterns won't be that good because it's all old cards and they were like weird and broken or really bad. But it actually turned out that like it's a whole different game, really. Like it really is a different game than it is today. And I like that game just as much as I like the game that current Magic is. So I wanted a cube to capture that. Yeah, the thing, it's funny, Magic. I really wish that the cart optimizer on TCG Player would let you specify heavily played or damaged. You can only say you want heavily played or better. You can't say you want heavily played only or you know, heavily played or worse. But I found that like there are tons of heavily played cards on TCG Player, and they're like decent prices. Like they tend to be like half as expensive as the market price, maybe a little less even in most cases. So I'm going to try and collect as many of these cards as I can just from people I know because I think that's part of the fun. I've had everyone that's given me a card for the cube sign a basic land, so I have the basic lands in the cube will be signed by the people who help me build it. So I'm trying to build it that way as much as I possibly can, and then I'm sure I'll order some cards at some point to finish it out because at some point I'm just going to want to play it, you know? Yeah, I think damage cards are totally fine. I have really fallen in love with the damage aesthetic, and I immediately, after like acquiring just a couple beat up cards, was like, oh, this is going to be a whole new thing for me to be obsessed about and trying to hunt down. Like somebody on the Cube Discord is sending me a deranged hermit that somebody scrawled in like ballpoint pen, "I kill you, die, die, die" on, which I think is fantastic, and I can't wait for that. I just feel like they all have so much personality, right? Like you could tell somebody either really liked or really hated Deranged Hermit and was like, this card is too good. I'm going to mark it up. We've chatted our way to the end of the black cards, friends. There she blows. The Ristic Studies video, it's called Dear Gonti Loves Sophie, and it is nominally about this EDH deck that DJ, what's his last name? DJ is like a big Magic seller, a big sort of member of the Magic community. He's built this deck of like nothing but severely damaged cards. That's a Gonti EDH deck, and it's like severely damaged and also all kinds of rare printings of things. Like he's got nothing but alpha swamps, right? This is all damaged swamps, and it's all just beat up, and it's stuff he was a card seller. He is a card seller, so he has like a lot of cards go through his hands, and he would just put all the damaged ones aside. Eventually made a deck out of it. And Sam, of course, at Ristic Studies made a beautiful video talking about it and the virtues of, you know, getting a little wear patterns on a thing that you love and accepting that. Anyway, that's it for black. I'm lower on creatures than I was a little while ago. I've really kind of weaned off of the black aggro plan, though I still have plenty of black cards here to support a black aggro deck, just not mono black aggro. You got to be black-white or black-red to be an aggro deck in my cube these days, and I'm happy with it there. It means there's a lot fewer narrow cards that only go in one particular deck. On to red.